Hello, World Changers, and welcome back to the World Changers podcast with AmickyCarol and her guests. Today's episode is a little different. Instead of traveling to one place and hearing one story, we're bringing together several remarkable people from across the world who are creating change in their communities. From Morocco to Algeria, from Cote d'Ivoire and beyond. And in fact, today from the USA to Zimbabwe and South Africa, each of our guests is working in different contexts, but they share something powerful in common: the belief that ordinary people can create extraordinary change. Today, we're going to reflect on impact, the lessons we've learned along the way, the challenges that shape our work, and what future of positive change could look like. So let's dive in. Okay, so I'd like our guests to start by just using one sentence to introduce themselves. So I'm looking for who they are, what they do, and what their favorite thing to do is. But then off the back of that, I'd like them to describe the change that they want to see in their community in just one sentence. Martha, what would it be for you?
Wow. Thank you for having me. I'm going to start there. Thank you so much for allowing me to be a part of this. Mine will probably be a run-on sentence. I'll try to keep it not too long. I always tease about elevator speeches, right? That you don't want the building to be 100 stories high when you do your elevator pitch, right? Um,
I love it.
I am an active listening ambassador. What I love to do outside of work, although I believe that work and life are all inextricably linked, is dance. If I'm on the dance floor, I'm happy. So this is this run-on sentence, dot, 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 comma. In terms of the change, I I have to bring it back around to my active listening comment, which is I'm a big believer that if we can create an active listening movement in the world, that we will be in a much better place in a in short order.
Okay.
Does that cover everything?
That's brilliant. And
Okay.
listen, I love the fact that you love to dance because that's one of my favorite things to do. Anyone who knows me knows that I love to dance, and that can very quickly lift my mood. But just to follow up, what first made you care deeply about this issue?
About active listening?
Mm-hmm.
So, one of the things I've learned as a professional fundraiser over the years is that when you sit down with someone, and I think it's important to note, it's not just about donors, right? It's when you sit down with any stakeholder. It might be a beneficiary partner, it might be a constituent, it might be a board member, it might be your staff member, it might be a colleague. That if you actually demonstrate that you care, because to me, the heart of active listening is caring, that you actually care about what they have to say and that you really want to hear and understand where they're coming from, that it changes everything. And at the risk of getting even more on my soapbox, because I want to make sure everyone else has time to answer this question, as AmickyCarol, you and I, have a podcast coming out soon. In fact, next week that you're on, which is fantastic, where we talked about, right, that active listening is improving mutual understanding. That's what it is.
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
that's it.
thank you. Honestly, and I'm not sure when this is going to air, but just for context, the podcast that we spoke together on, it was fantastic. I really enjoyed that. It's coming out on Monday the 9th of March, which is the day after International Women's Day. So yeah,
Yes.
so do go, yes, go check it out, and we'll drop all the links with this. So yeah, thank you so
Right.
much, Martha. Martha Schumacher, just in case people are wondering. Okay. Now I'm going to hand over to you, Terence. Terence, introduce yourself again. Tell
Thank
us
you.
who you are, what you do, what your favorite thing to do is, and the change you want to see in your community in one sentence.
All right. It's going to be a long sentence. So my name is Terence. So my name is Terence Mugoa. I am a son of encouragement from the city of kings and queens, which is Blawayo. And I've built my life around wanting to find solutions to problems I've encountered and my loved ones have encountered. So those are the businesses that I've built. And they have one thing in common. They're about helping people discover what makes them special, so their gifts and their talents, and developing them to the point that they can lean in on that to live a life of purpose and to build value for as many people as they can. And I love doing this because there's nothing more fascinating for me than to see someone who felt like they were losing, looked like they were losing, eventually find their win in life.
Nice. I love it. You managed to string it all together. It was
All
seven
right.
sentences in one. Well done. But Terence, son of encouragement, from the very first day I met you, I
Yeah.
loved that so much. I mean, what made you care so deeply about this?
I think, when you grow up in environments where you have to get used to having less than enough,
Mm,
and you realize you're not the only one, you start asking yourself, surely there's different. So that's been my journey. Like there must be different. There are people who are living life at a level we all want to, that seems better than us. So I began to go on that journey for myself. And when I got there, I realized it wasn't fun by yourself. And I wanted to take as many people with me as possible. Probably influenced largely by my mom, because I always saw her lift people up. And I loved how it made me feel watching her do that. And I just got hooked.
mm. As somebody who, was very close to her mom and recently lost her, I mean, for me, that's so powerful, the impact that our mothers can have on us.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for sharing. Kailele, last but definitely not the least, we're going
Oh,
to come
yes.
to you now.
I think
And
I have the. Please, please
yeah,
continue, Carol.
yeah, okay. So what I didn't say was Terence is based in Zimbabwe. So Martha is in the US, Terence is in Zimbabwe, and you are in South Africa in Durban, aren't you? So if you
Correct.
could introduce yourself, tell us who you are, what you do, what your favorite thing to do is, and the change you want to see in your community, all in one sentence, if you can, that would be great. So over to you.
I think I have the shortest sentence now since Martha and Terence did gobble a lot. But from my side, my name is Kairi Kabinde, from South Africa. I'm a young philanthropist. I have a non-profit organization which is called Dream Bricks to Humble. My favorite thing I like to do besides work, I'm a huge sports fanatic. And I mean sports, I mean golf, cricket, hockey, soccer, every form of sports. But for me, I think what drives me the most, how I grew up, I resonate with what Terence mentioned as well. I grew up in a family where you have to give because you have also been given a few things to start your life. And I think what we do for our organization, we put a wide net of mentors for the youth to tap into. Because I know I'm sure we all grew up having ideas, but we never had mentors to guide us. And that's the space I'm trying to build for the youth to put a network of mentors for them to be guided.
Thank you. What do an active listener, a son of encouragement, and a philanthropist have in common? I'm sure people are wondering, well, listen, you know, it would be interesting to know because you already started leaning into this, Terence, quite a bit more than the others. And I really want
Yeah.
us to go to the moment that started it all.
Yeah.
Because having spoken to you all, I feel like there's so much you have in common. But why don't you share with us the moment that, when everything shifted? What was that moment for you when you said, I have to do something? Or maybe it
Oh,
was a gradual realization or a turning point. But I
yeah.
think many people listening will recognize that or would want
Yeah.
to hear about it.
Yeah. So, like you said, I think there was just gradual little nudges, but really the big push came around about when I was getting ready to go to university, and I was the first in my family to make it that far. And interesting enough, I'd been accepted to go to a South African university. And one of the things we hadn't factored in is how quickly they want money from foreign students. So from celebrating being accepted and about to get into be the first in the family to go to university, I had the rude awakening of being told I'd missed the payment deadline and my place had disappeared. And the turning point for me was getting to a point where I'd watch my mom become afraid to answer the phone or cry after every phone call when they told, because back then you had to literally reply to an email or accept over the phone whether or not you're accepting the denial. So we started running away from phones. And I remember seeing my mom cry, and I was like, this is not right. I was like, this can't be. And that for me, Carol, was the turning point. I prayed that I wouldn't lose the place, and thank God for a stubborn father who insisted I still go, even after they told me don't come. And when the university gave me a second chance, like school was no longer about passing grades. I was on a mission. I need to make sure that this never happens to another Zimbabwean again, what I went through, losing on a potential. And then I started asking myself, but hey, now that I'm here, how do I make the most of it? And that just changed everything. Like for me, university was now a mission to build up a business that would come and correct what I'd gone through.
Wow, thank you so much. That's really interesting. I'd like to lean into that a little bit, but before we do, I want to come to Martha because you're the only one who's representing, as it were, the global north today,
Yeah.
as it were, you know? And for me, that's really important, especially because we're at a time where, for most of the world, I think, we're just looking with horror as it appears that there's more trouble being stirred up from your country than anywhere else. And nobody gets it. It just doesn't make sense. Existing rule of law, things we took as norms are being challenged, boundaries, just completely. And when you think about it, I'd like to know, what your thoughts are, but more importantly, how you think across the world, when we talk about development and progress, whether that means anything and whether, you know, a lot of difference can be made. Because it's great that Terence is being challenged to do something. I am, Kailele is. But look, what's the point if no matter what you do, the people who is well established that they're causing the main problems just continue to do so? I know it doesn't seem fair to ask you that, but
Yeah.
it's worth getting your
Yeah.
perspective for what it's worth.
Well, on behalf of everybody from the global north, I'm kidding. I'm trying to, this is such a, I mean, first of all, of course, I could spend the rest of our time here today answering that question and way beyond. Okay, so that's number one. Number two, kidding aside, obviously this is, one person coming to you from the global north. I guess the first thing I just want to say is I could not be more sorry. So there's that about what's happening here. But I think actually it's interesting because AmickyCarol, you and I have talked quite a bit, I feel like last fall, about that fine line between kind of despair, desperation, shutting down, all the things that, trust me, a lot of, my colleagues, my family, my friends, and I kind of feel like doing on not even just a daily basis, sometimes an hourly basis. So there's that, but of course, you and I have talked about also the counter to that, which is there are authoritarian forces at work here that want us to do that. They want us to shut down. That's exactly what they want. And so my goal every day is to do everything I can to continue to have hope, to continue to bring hope to others, to continue to support those who are being most targeted. Probably the best example most recently that I know has been, covered globally is what has happened in Minneapolis. So I just look at my personal goal, which I'm just, not even a tiny drop in this very, very large, ocean, but is to try to do what I can to support, especially those communities who are being most targeted. In terms of kind of another part, though, of the answer to your question, AmickyCarol, and again, you're going to need to cut me off because this question you've just asked me is the kind of thing that, as you might imagine, many of my colleagues and friends and I are exploring and discussing, and also hopefully taking action on, on a daily, and again, even more than daily basis. I think the thing, though, I want to add is one of the things I'm often reminded of here in the States, especially by my friends and colleagues who are African American, is that the Civil Rights Act was just passed in 1965. What I mean by just is that was only 60 years ago. So to say that this is the first time that Americans, and especially certain Americans, have experienced this kind of treatment would be a disservice, right, to the history of what's actually happened in this country. And again, I don't want to, I want to keep this hopeful. I don't want to I'm not trying to go to a negative place. I'm more just trying to give historical context, right, to the fact that for many people and for many people's, you know, um, ancestors, much of this, if not all of this, is not new. So it's more a matter of how do you respond. And I think maybe a good example to give in this moment that might be helpful is one of the conversations in the nonprofit world, in the NGO world in the US right now, is about the fact that less and less people are making gifts to organizations, right? That the number of donors is declining. And what I would argue is it depends, because there are certain organizations who have managed to get across that this is, a point of crisis, and therefore have been able to engage more donors. And so I think I'm just trying to kind of, like open up this idea that are we at a place where when we talk about hope and when we talk about concrete ways that folks can actually help to, address this moment in history, whether it's immigration law, organizations helping out, immigration lawyers helping out with various NGOs here in the States, whether it's social service organizations, whatever the case may be, hope is an important message right now here. And I again, at the risk of now having said that word probably 5 times in this last couple minutes, that's where I'm trying anyway to live.
Thank you. That's
Mm.
really helpful. I mean,
Yeah.
you can't stress listening more than enough in what you do. And I know you believe that it's a leadership trait. But I do wonder, you've mentioned money so much, and so that forces me to move on to the money issue. And Kailele, you're a philanthropist, and philanthropy often focuses on giving money, but is money actually the most important ingredient in creating change?
Um, I think it comes back to your why and what are you pushing? What's your core identity of what are you doing? I think as a philanthropist, I think there's a purpose and there's a mission that triggers you to start something. And I'll fall back to what Shane said. I started my organization when I was in grade 12, still in high school, with huge aspirations to do after what I want to do to varsity when I go to varsity. But when I saw there's a link to getting help from someone who has done so much in life, I couldn't get access to find out, hey, Carol, how do you build Avocado Foundation? And you couldn't get that access. You couldn't get the phone call. You get the email. So that was the thing that was lacking in South Africa to get that access to anyone who's can be a mentor. So when I built the organization, I built it from the lack of access to get a mentor. And yes, to get back to your question, was money was needed to start organization, but I think having a conversation would lead you to getting much more.
Interesting. What do you think communities really need from philanthropists, though? Because, yeah, money is important, but what more, apart from money, what more? Or what's the breadth of what communities could get from philanthropists?
I'll go to what Marcia said in one word, hope. Literally. I'll,
Right?
tell- I'll, I'll tell the truth. I think I came from a community where people didn't even know what the word hope would mean to them because we couldn't get so much things being done. Yes, money is important, but before getting the money, you have to start with hope and the vision and to have the reality and say, no, I could get what I want to do. And as philanthropists, I think we were there to just be the bridge for anyone. And it shouldn't have to be a philanthropist, to be anything you're doing in life. And
Mm.
once you can do that, you can actually get people to actually have believe in themselves, especially from us in the youth of South Africa, from what has happened from the party of 1994. Luckily, I was born in 1997. I didn't experience the party, but when I heard the stories of my grandmothers, they couldn't get access to go to the beach. They couldn't go to the mall. They couldn't go to anything. And for them to tell me their stories, I was like, damn, okay, this is real. So it all just falls back in hope and just in charity and saying, no, guys, yes, we want the money, but understand yourself and where you want to come, where you want to end up in life and what you want to do. And I just live on the word and lift as you rise. And I've been lifted up for so many people along my journey, and I want to do the same as well.
I love that. Absolutely. And honestly, I believe that money does give hope. You know,
It
the
does.
hope,
Lots
it
of
really
hope.
does. The more money you can give, the more hope you can impact, the return on impact is huge. So, I'm coming to you, Terrence, because
I have a feeling.
absolutely. What happens to people? Because encouragement, obviously, you must be
Yeah.
doing a lot. Your currency must be full of hope, hope
Oh, yes.
bills and coins. So tell me, what's role hope really plays in shaping the futures of the communities we're trying to build and how you
Yeah.
managed to see that, come together over time?
That's a brilliant question. And you just thought you made me go to a book I was reading about how hope, and I think it's hope in the right things does not disappoint. So I think
Hmm.
hope in the right things will allow you to endure the difficult things and enjoy the good things. So and when you look at hope, it really starts from and I love what Kaya was sharing. Um, I think what people need more than money at times is beliefs. So we need to invest in our bank of beliefs. Hope can only exist if the belief has been sowed first. And I think when we begin to believe in something enough that we want to act on it, begin to do something, the action begins to be, tangible evidence of what we are hoping for. And I think when we believe, act, we are in motion to having. So I think hope is absolutely key, but it must be hope in the right things because some people hope in money. When they have a lot of it, they realize that life is empty. So I think it comes back to understanding your purpose. When you understand your purpose, it centers your hope on the right things.
That's beautiful, honestly. Growing up, my dad always used to challenge me when I said, I had faith or hope in something. And he used to push back and say, is that hope, foolishness, or presumption? And I want to ask you, because I know there's a difference between hope and wishful thinking.
Oh,
How do
yes.
people move from simply hoping things will change to actually
Yeah.
building the change that we want to see?
Whoever's going to answer that question is so lucky. Is that my question?
Listen, the floor is open. If you've got the answer to what practical hope looks
Yeah,
like in your work, I'd love to hear it.
yeah. I think for me, I'll come back to a success formula that we've come across in the process of doing work. I think when we had our conversation last year, I spoke about a success formula that I came across whilst reading the good book. And I think in all things, and if you'll allow me to lean in on that, we've got a creator who's creating this wonderful world. And in creating it, he's giving a manuscript or a transcript on how you go about it. And three things stood out for me. It was be, do, have. Be
Mm,
speaks to identity, do speaks to action and activity, and have speaks to possession. And I
interesting.
think practical hope is when you take what you believe and show it through your actions. And I think for many people, you'll find everyone wants a good life, but how many people are actually willing to go out and do the difficult things to
Mm,
build that life and not
mm,
stop until you've got what you desire? And I think a lot of us are stuck. In practical hope for me is this. When we let our life circumstances, hey, I grew up poor, hey, I was abused as a child, become a crutch. So you say, this happened to me, therefore I cannot do what you're asking of me, and the only time I can do it. So if you want to change my life, you need to give me money. And when you've given me money, then finally I can start doing stuff. And when I start doing stuff, I can finally be stuff. So I think we've inverted. Impractical hope inverts the success formula. Practical hope understands it starts with me. I have to show up. And when I show up long enough, I'm going to get what I'm hoping for.
Nice. Very nice indeed. I love it. You know, in difficult times, communities often look for hope in their leaders. Now, you've alluded to a greater power, but I want to ask the rest of the panel, where should people really place their hope? In leaders, in institutions, in themselves, in their communities, like where, especially so that we can see the kind of progress that's accelerated when challenges are huge. Where should people be?
Uh,
Yeah, please, Kailele.
um, I'd say charity begins at home, eh?
Okay.
So I'd say it starts from your upbringing, from your community, because that's where the plant has been seed. That's where the seed has been planted. And what's being watered within the seed is your environment around that. So I'd say community is a strong bond for your growth and for your development to prosper in life. And as you continue with the journey along that, other things will come along that journey within the environment, community, politics, and you just clasp onto that.
Hmm. I hear that. I hear that. But if you have a community that's messed up, and that's the reality for many people,
Mm, mm.
whether intentionally, by design, or by accident, or I don't know, for whatever reason, what helps or what could help people hold on to hope without them becoming discouraged?
I think that'll fall into your, I wouldn't say mindset. I'd say it'll be your imagination. I dwell a lot with my imagination because when I started my organization in high school, I had a huge imagination, which I wrote down a quote in my high school photo, dream big, stay humble. So that was triggered from what has happened in my community, which wasn't good though, but I had a more hope to what can be done if I step out of the community with my own imagination.
Hmm.
So I think to answer your question, yes, a lot of people come from communities where it's very disadvantaged and you want to be, as you grow up, you want to leave the community. So I think your imagination plays a huge impact in terms of what you want to do outside of the community as well.
Thank you. I hear that. Martha, I'm really looking to you for this one because if hope can change lives, and we've touched a lot on that, what responsibility do leaders, mentors, philanthropists, have to nurture hope in others? And I really want to acknowledge the fact that some communities are just no good. I mean, Terence, you said you need to create the right community. Sometimes it's just not possible. I think about women who are in oppressive societies who have absolutely no say and at the risk of their lives. I mean, how do they create the right community? Sometimes it's a tall order. So, what do you do? So, maybe we should be speaking about the responsibility that leaders and other people have to nurture this hope in others. Martha?
Yeah.
Mhm.
Uh, that multiple questions there, I think, and all really important ones. One thing I wanted to do was kind of in response to these, go back a little bit to build on what Kalile said about I feel like there's often when you move forward to take on, a project, an initiative, a community kind of goal. I think often what has to happen is it has to be a combination of a leap of faith, because at that point, right, you don't necessarily know that you're going to get there. And in fact, I also wanted to build on Terrence when you said belief, hope, and action. I really, or sorry, and then be, do, and have. I love both of those. Um, I think that leap of faith is often the belief that it can get done and the hope that it really will get done, right? And yet, it is a leap of faith because you don't know for sure. And so I think as leaders, AmickyCarol, I would say that kind of keeping that momentum going, keeping people believing, but also for yourself. And I've been seeing a lot of this lately online, especially on LinkedIn, where people are saying, if you as a leader, if you're in a leadership role, and by the way, that's another thing I would say is, and I'll get back to my point here in a minute, is that AmickyCarol, when you talked about, certain leaders, there often is not someone in the actual formal leadership role that is someone we necessarily want to be looking to. So our leaders are everywhere, and they're often not the people that have the title, right? And so I think you look for that. But coming back to if you are that leader in that leadership role, I've been noticing online more and more, which I am such a believer of, that the message to these leaders is you need to have your group of folks that you can go to and get support, because to be the one who's trying to drive the momentum every day to try to get to that goal, to whatever that community goal is, you've got to have it's kind of the joke about you go on an airplane and you better put that mask on first, before you're help. In other words, you've got to make sure you have your own support system in place so that you can be that leader to have the strength to keep everybody moving forward. And I think one example I'd love to just share quickly, I hope, is I've worked over the years with an affordable housing organization in the Washington, D.C. area. And we undertook a campaign, and again, I'm back to money, but I promise you this really at the end of the day is not as much about the money as the bigger picture, which is, a certain amount of money needed to be raised in a short time to be able to increase the amount of affordable housing in the region by double, which is saying a lot, especially the DC region to begin with, right? Does not have a lot of affordable housing. And first of all, that affordable housing goal of getting to that double was going to be by 2030. And by the way, we're there. So that's just unreal. But yes, exactly. And that's really what I'm talking about, right? Is that yes, we raised the money. Yes, by the way, we ended up with over 8,000 donors giving to that campaign for an organization that normally has hundreds of donors, not thousands. All of those metrics are important, but that's the point, brings us back to doubling the amount of actual affordable housing that happens in the region. And that's the social impact. And that's the life-changing moment for, thousands of families. So I think I covered a lot, and I hope I covered all your questions, AmickyCarol, but let me know if I didn't.
I love how we're really playing with hope and leaning into hope. And if we could just stay there for a minute, one of the things that was said earlier on is that hope is a powerful force, but hope placed in the wrong things can sometimes hold us back. I want to ask you guys, honestly, because you also mentioned leadership. We started talking about leadership because we said change your community, talk to people who have leadership. And yeah, you're right. And this might be a good moment to remind people that leadership is influence. It has nothing to do with titles. So wherever you are, whoever you are, you can lead if you can influence. And I suppose it's those little things that could change communities. But just holding on to that, right now across many countries, people are losing trust in their political leaders and institutions. Where do you think the world is going, and what opportunities do community leaders, influencers, world changers, ordinary people, what opportunities do we have now to shape our communities to be how we want them to be? That's an open question for anyone.
That's a great question, Carol. And if you'll allow me, I just want to go back a little bit to the conversations we're having. And I just had a thoughts about, bad communities, because I think to a degree, I think I've had a feel of what it feels to be in a community that's not working for you. And there are two things that come to mind. One is decisions have descendants. So every bad decision made by our leaders will carry with it descendants. And those descendants are what creates the tension in us. So some of us got into business because of the bad community. Because the thing is, when you're in a bad environment, after some time, you yourself will realize this environment is terrible for me. I cannot sustain it. Otherwise, it's going to cause me to die, right? So I think a lot of us get into these places, and I think this is I guess the benefit of bad leadership of some bad spaces is that they create that critical conversation that may have taken longer if you were in a sort of comfortable environment. You are forced to introduce yourself to yourself because eventually you realize that you cannot keep relying on other people. So I think how we create some of these communities is because we get to a point where we go through some bad things and we say, look, man, I'm tired of this. And complaining is not changing anything. So that means I've got no choice. I need to become that change I'm looking for. And what you start finding is when you raise your hand and say, hey, I don't quite like this, there's an army of people who are feeling the same way, who are just waiting for someone to just be the first voice. And I think that's sort of where we begin to build those communities, because it needs someone who's brave. I think that's what world changer becomes. Someone who's brave enough to go against the status quo that's not working for them and say something, but not just say something, but go on to do something. So I think for me, being in Zimbabwe, we've had many occasions to lose hope in our leadership because sadly, in as much as they speak a good game, the evidence on the ground, we are the champions of inflation. I won't go deeper into what Zimbabwe, but we've got so many things that are mentioned about us that are not in the good because we've had leaders who've spoken a good game but haven't shown up. But what has that done for us as a nation? It has created a resilient nation where people realize I can no longer rely on politics to provide food on the table. We need to come together and begin to do certain things together because we know what it looks like when we don't do that. So I think it's not a pleasant place to be. I don't think as this is what the model for leadership should be. Leadership should be a source of hope, and we should be moving people into better by showing them how good things can get, not showing them how bad they can get and forcing them into a corner where they feel like, hey, I might as well do it now because this is not working.
Absolutely love that. Honestly, there's so many nuggets there, but the thing that really struck me is just the idea that, bad decisions have descendants, like, all of those things. It really makes sense.
Yeah.
Somebody listening might think, yeah, that sounds like us. Our leadership failures have shaped generations. But really, where have you guys seen, community leaders doing things to shape their own generations for good, beyond their own time in power? And what kind of tools, what would you say to people? These are practical things that you can do to reclaim your voice and demand better leadership without, of course, being shot. Because we have experiences of people, yeah, disappearing because they reclaimed their voice and demanded better leadership. What can people do right now in 2026?
I'll go back to what Terence mentioned, being on the ground. I think what most leaders and politics, I want to say politics, most leaders in general don't really communicate with the people who led them to be where they are. And we neglect the people who brought us to the spot where we are as a leader. So if we could just ground ourselves and go back to the basis of community building, that's where everything just evolves.
Hmm.
So once we stop that narrative, we won't get anywhere in life or in the community that we are trying to build.
And what would you say to, say, young people or ordinary people who don't necessarily see themselves as leaders? Okay. So, because right now we can't really force leaders who've gotten you into a bad state to take responsibility and make things better. What are the practical things that ordinary people can do to reclaim their voice and, just remove bad leadership or operate and reshape their communities in spite of bad leadership?
Was that for me again?
Well, it's for anyone, maybe Martha. I mean, considering it would be
Yeah.
good to hear from you, considering, the kind of leadership example the US is providing for us right now. What practical things could one do?
Or lack thereof, right? Sorry. Oh, sorry. I digress. So I look right now to two communities here in the US as actually three stellar examples. One is New York, one is Chicago, one is Minneapolis.
Okay.
In New York, I know it made global news that Mayor Mamdani
Mhm.
just changed everything. His approach to how he campaigned, the fact that every single institutional leader, with just a couple of exceptions that I, am happy for, but sadly, most of the rest, every institutional, historical kind of party entrenched person was not supporting him for the role. And yet he managed to mobilize, speaking of emerging leaders, more young folks. He's got a lot of emerging leaders on his staff now. He is, as Kalile said, he's on the ground. And
Mm.
he is doing that every day. And he's out there and he visited, every bodega, I think, in New York practically, just so I love looking to him as an example of someone to be a great model for our future leaders. The second I mentioned earlier, and we'll say again, is Minneapolis. They are persevering and they are leading the way in how they've managed to organize and fight back. And one of the things I really appreciate is that recently, I think a lot of us have been noticing, we're still hearing from Minneapolis folks, hey, don't forget it. It's one of those things, right? Where, oh, it's the big news. And then the next day it's gone. Boy, I think everyone on the line today, especially Kalila and Terrence, can relate to that idea of where all are based. Oh, okay. Well, yeah, we're really worried about, if we go way back, right? Well, we can talk about things like apartheid. It's like, no, this is a day by day, week by week, month by month, year by year fight that has to keep going. So I think again, bringing it back to Kalile's, being on the ground, that's key, and that's what they're doing in Minneapolis every day, including things like, letting neighbors know when ICE, for example, is in the neighborhood. And then the last is Chicago. Chicago, the governor there has just said, I'm not okay with this, and I'm not gonna bend the knee, and we're going, and they've done, some pretty incredible uh, actions and organizing, and just been again persistent and consistent. Maybe those are my words for emerging leaders, is to be persistent and consistent. And at the same time, though, for these emerging leaders, you do have to take care of yourself. In a way, it brings me back to what I said earlier about your support network, right? Is making sure that you know who really has your back and who is maybe there because they have their own agenda. So make sure you've got, that handful of trusted people around you, because this is the long term. This is the long fight, right? So those are some of my thoughts.
I love that. I really do. You know, I wonder, do bad leaders create broken systems, or do broken systems create bad leaders?
I think the silence was the answer.
Who knows? Is that what
Exactly,
we're
guy.
saying?
Exactly,
Exactly, guy.
exactly. You can move on. You can move on to the next question.
But but
Okay.
but I can give that a bite. I think systems are I think leaders create people create systems, right? Just like culture, the cultures we have are just a type of system, right? A series of beliefs that we hold true and we practice.
Mhm.
And I think if you are in a position of influence, so if you look at leadership from a point of influence, you have the ability to create systems, right? And the question now becomes, if it's a good system, its results will show. If it's a bad system, you're going to get tension. So where I think for many of us in African jurisdictions where we felt like the systems have let us down,
Mhm.
I think that's where you talk about being careful not to say things that can cause you to disappear. I think it's also come down to a conversation on what is your communication system. I think we've come from societies where we've had to go to war to bring about change. And I think that's become the system. Even when we're not lifting guns, our words are weapons of warfare, and it's fighting each other. I remember having a conversation with a politician from an opposition party at a conference. And he had all this wisdom about what needs to happen in our country, right? Really great ideas. And I thought like you could actually apply them. But his language was he had some choice words for the ruling party. And I remember asking him on the side, I was like, tell me something. Can we agree that the only reason people do things is because they feel like it? And he's like, that makes sense. I can agree with that idea. And I was like, with the way you're addressing these guys, do you think they'll ever feel like doing what you're saying? So I think some of the things that we've done, I think is we need to go back and understand that systems are based on principles, right? And the principles we apply either perpetuate a good system or create a terrible system. And for me, it's come down to a place that if I want to see certain changes in the places I'm operating in, I have to understand who is my opposer. And my opposer will only begin to move in a way that's favorable to me if I begin to speak to them and work with them in a way that makes them feel like wanting to come to the table. So some of the fights that we are having is because we put more fight language and we let egos go ahead of us. But what could happen is if I began to say, hey, look, at the end of the day, we disagree on a lot of things, but what could we agree on? And I think that could be some practical steps. What can we agree on with the person I'm opposing? Yes, we all want to succeed. Our reasons may be different. Can we start working on something that's successful and move in that particular way? So I think to come back to your question, I think it's a bit of both, but I think what starts is the bad system initiated by the person with influence. And what could end up happening is if that system isn't documented or people don't rise up against it, that system can now become a bad system that oppresses the good people.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, spot on. And I love it. This is the first time I've heard it put in that way, that it's a question of people just not feeling like it. Very often when I've worked with politicians across the continent, I often hear, oh, there's a lack of political will. And it amounts to the same thing. They just don't feel like it. Full stop. And yeah, okay, so now that we're being honest about these things, are there other uncomfortable truths about social change that people rarely talk about that you'd like to highlight before we now start, winding down? Or have we?
I really love to hear Kaya's take, being someone who's in South Africa, because you guys are like in our view, the champs of really, pushing change as a people, and I'm sure Martha's got some interesting takes. Look at me throwing questions to other people.
For my neighbor, I'm very disappointed. You're my neighbor. I thought you'd back me up. But I think it falls back to what we had earlier on in the discussion where I'll jump back to what you said, Terence, that you figure out that you had an issue in Zimbabwe and you couldn't get funding, you couldn't go to varsity, you couldn't come to South Africa. So I think here in South Africa, the youth has actually wanted to have their own voice and talk for themselves. Which leads to what I wanted to say that yes, we are growing, we're developing, but they all came back, okay, cool. Apartheid happened in 1994, we're in 2026 now. Now change has happened. What is going on? So the youth is like, no, we actually want to have our own voice now, be our own voice. So it all comes back to what you also mentioned on the ground. Yes, it did cause a bit of conflict with certain politicians within South Africa, the wider apartheid and the new alliance. But what's the funny thing is that the youth has actually came together now and said, no, we are the future and we have to be the ground makers as a collective.
Wow. I love that. Now that we're talking about the youth, I feel like they really appreciate people being honest. And social change is often presented in inspiring stories, and those stories matter. But the truth is, behind every success, there are also difficult realities that people don't always talk about. So I think in asking that question, I really want you guys to think about, what myth about social change you wish people would stop believing, or, what people get wrong about trying to change the world, or what part of the work is far harder than people imagine, and that's for each of you.
Yeah, I think there's what comes to mind is like a savior complex. Like we want to then ride on one person's story forever. And it's not true. Or, we stereotype and make it seem like what worked in Zimbabwe is going to work in South Africa and Nigeria. It just doesn't work. Certain realities are different. And in as much as stories are nice, I'm going through this as well as we develop leadership material. There are some battles that just don't resonate with a particular people. Like you can tell me about how you fought to have good hair, to have a hairstyle. And I'm like, do you realize what we're going through? Like, how is this? So I think around social changes, like we sometimes get to a point where we fall in love with certain characters and we make it seem like their story can carry through across the continent. I don't particularly think it's the way. The second thing is just having this whole thing where we find one champion and we want to take that champion to all the conferences that have to do with everything. I think what we're missing in terms of really creating social change is the collaboration aspect of it. It doesn't show, it doesn't translate as much as it should, and I think we end up getting to spaces where we champion a few and we celebrate and we have these funny things. We believe competitions are going to bring about the change we want. Like, oh yeah, the top three ideas, and I don't particularly think if you really want to bring about social change, competitions are the way. It's supposed to be how do we collectively come up with situations where instead of celebrating one business or one social entrepreneur, we create communities of that and celebrate communities of people. So people see how we are bringing together people in different spaces and circumstances and moving together, as opposed to making rock stars that go on tour and get wonderful awards. I think I said a lot that could
But
get me in
it's
trouble.
You can listen, the point you made is so powerful because it is something definitely in the UK that for the past decade or so has really come to the forefront. We don't believe in white saviors or even black saviors or brown saviors, any kind of savior,
Mm,
because the truth is that communities already know what they need. And
yeah.
so, if you want to help anyone, if you're coming in, it's just making sure that they lead those solutions instead of
Mm,
having it imposed on them.
yeah.
I think that's
Absolutely.
such a powerful, powerful, response. Martha, what about you? What exactly, would you say, in speaking to this? What would be the hardest truth that you've learned about creating change?
Well, I think like Terrence, I'm going to make two comments, two quick statements. First of all, the first is it's funny that you just brought up about Amiki Carol, the co-creation piece, right? The fact that because you and I have talked so much about co-creation, and so to me, the co-creation has to come from the community who are the folks living it every day. And I mean, just to state the obvious, very obvious, but and thank you for the support there, Terrence. But come on, that should just be baseline. So that's first is that I don't think we're there yet on a lot of folks necessarily really understanding and socializing that and believing that that is the way to do it. The second thing that has been a long, long, long time pet peeve of mine is this idea that we are, and at least it's referred to this way here in the States. I'm not sure if it's referred to this way globally. You all will let me know. Is how we keep calling the nonprofit sector that, NGOs, INGOs, the third sector. Meaning, what's number one? Well, of course, number one's the for-profit sector, and number two is government. And we're just happy to get whatever we can at the piddling bottom of that list. And I just, wow. I mean, Terrence, I'm glad that made you chuckle. I'm glad both of you responded the way you did. I am just, unabashedly a believer that we are the number one sector. And I know that's probably going to sound a little bit, maybe, I don't know, American competitive or something. Maybe that's coming out. But of course, that's not what I mean by it. I mean that without us, without this sector, without social impact, without the vibrancy, the innovation, which often is innovation in the face of limited or no resources, without us, I think the world is just a much, much bleaker place. And so I have a real pet peeve about, for example, and I'm just going to call this out, when a board member shows up from the for-profit world and says, "Why aren't you doing XYZ? This is how we do it." Now, I know that Carol, you and I think, have had some good spirited debates about the fact, I don't want to put words in your mouth, I hope you'll push back, that there are things to learn from all sectors. And there are some things happening in the for-profit sector that, of course, we can learn from. But guess what? Those other sectors can learn just as much from us. So, okay, I think enough on that soapbox, but it looks like we've got some, maybe some consensus. Yeah, one.
Listen, it's more than consensus because I agree with you. This is probably the most innovative sector because we do the most with the least. And if that's not innovation, I don't know what is. The reality, though, I think, and you were almost touching on this, is that change is much slower than people expect. And
Oh,
that's the
yes.
truth. Because you talked about it earlier on, thinking about the civil rights movement. Real change takes far longer than people think. It often takes decades, not just years. I mean, think about anything that really upsets the world or upended it. Think about transatlantic slavery. Even after it was abolished, or at least people were bribed to stop, or it became unprofitable for them. However you look at it, it took quite a while to actually for the ripples to be felt. So I think honestly, people shouldn't assume that impact will be quick, but it's
Mm,
okay. And and that's why I'm very careful about using the word impact. I prefer outcomes because true impact takes a long time and is the result of multiple variables. So, yeah. Okay. I really want to dig into this because honestly, when I think about it, I have so many pet peeves, but that's one. I will make a commitment now to stop addressing us as the third sector you know um if that's the one takeaway from today. But
yeah.
also, what do you guys think about the fact that good intentions are not enough? Because I
Oh,
see
yeah.
a lot of naivete, and would anyone like to speak to that? Because it would be helpful, especially for young people who want to help, you know, but honestly, good intentions alone don't solve complex problems. So, what does effective action look like beyond good intentions and beyond telling people to, yeah, go be on the ground? Because all of that sounds okay, be on the ground, be in the community, that's fine. But what else? What does effective action look like?
Hmm. Sure. Yeah, I think that's I think you really asked us some difficult questions. Uh, I think we may need some need a good nap after this conversation because the brain is on overdrive. And I think one of the things that to move us away from being naive is really shaping this journey of transformation for what it is. One where you set forward an intention, and what tends to show up is not the celebration everyone expects. It's difficult.
Mm,
You set forth an intention that I'm going to start a business, I'm going to do this. What follows is everything fails, everything crumbles around you. So I think it's very important that when we decide a course of action, count the costs. It's
mm,
yeah, it would be nice if my community got better, got access, but count the cost.
mm,
What will you do when no one buys what you are selling?
mm,
What will you do when people misunderstand you? how important is this really for you? And does it leverage what is unique about you? Because I think a lot of us don't understand that even in the journey of entrepreneurship, the biggest fight is to stay in business long enough to actually experience the success you're chasing.
Yes.
But no one talks about this,
Mm-hmm.
that this is the journey. You will, and I think I've had experience time and time again in our country where you will do nothing wrong, but a policy change will render you bankrupt or out of business. So the compensation has to be, what is your higher level purpose? And have you actually taken the time to count the cost? And counting the cost is understanding how much money will this take? How much time is this going to leverage? What kind of person do I need to become or begin to, the kind of people I need to associate with? Because, the dream comes free. The process comes with a huge cost.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. That was a mic drop moment. Honestly, I love that. It's true. Being a change maker can sometimes feel lonely. You're absolutely correct because you're pushing against the status quo, aren't you?
Oh, yeah.
You know, I mean, I often say to people, just the three things I shared. You need skills. Changing the world is not, doesn't run just on the fumes of passion. You need real skills. You need to
Oh, yeah.
put together systems that'll survive you and, as much as possible, democratize those systems so that other
Yes.
people can take them and run with them. More than
Yeah.
anything, you need humility. And my God, like you said, that journey will humble you,
Yeah.
whether you like it or not, But that also lends itself to the fact that real change often challenges traditions, it'll challenge power structures, ways of thinking, and not everyone welcomes that. So, how do you navigate resistance when you know that change is necessary? Especially when you live in a culture that appreciates, promotes, and endorses psychophancy. In fact, sometimes that's the only way to survive. What do you do? So
I
yeah,
think
I love that. You do have to be prepared to be uncomfortable. Guys, we've had such a wonderful conversation from my perspective. It's been different because the first time round, you guys came and shared all these wonderful things you were doing, how amazing it was, gave some nice tidbits, and today I've asked you to come and try and solve the problems of the world with me. So
yeah.
yeah. Um, just to finish up, I'd love to hear what kind of, inspiring stories or advice that you'd like to give that buttresses the fact that social change isn't a straight line.
Yeah.
It's everything that we said, slow, uncomfortable, sometimes lonely, but it's also where hope and persistence meet. So, what do people need to know? What advice would you like to leave with them? If there was one thing you wanted them to take away, what would it be?
Mm. I am going to say I'll go last first.
Well, in fairness to you, you have done a lot of contributing. So, Kailele, this one,
Um,
yeah, you
I'll back you up, Terence. I'll back you up. You redeem yourself. From my side, I think my quote for what I live for is that the goal is to live on earth forever, but to leave something that will. And with that being said, I think I'll fall back to hope, first of all. I think the word of the day was hope. The word of the day was hope. But I think to anyone, if you can believe it, basically, if you can believe in the gut feeling, because I think the thing that fails most startups, they don't have the vision board finished on their head. And once you have something written out, I think then it's possible to do it. And to add on to what Terence said, I think your startup starts once your story has ended with your business. And once you start up with something and it fails, that's where it actually begins. And once you can start doing that, then you can say, okay, cool, I've done all these things wrong. Now I can start off thinking, now I can start off what I want to desire in my business or my community. Um, And that's actually just, I think that's the thing with us, the youth. We don't have the knack to be patient. We want something, we want the quick fix.
Mm.
But once something ends, we say, oh, that's the end of the day. I think I'm a perfect example of that. I started my organization a decade ago, 10 years ago. And what you say, Carol, it's not an impact that we're looking for. We're looking for something more than just an impact number. And the 10 years has been a roller coaster ride. But I'm here today talking to these wonderful people like you guys. And it all becomes from your vision, what you inspire to be. So if everyone can just dive deeper toward themselves and so what do I want to leave on earth? And you can see with that.
Amazing. Thank you, Clarence. Martha? Sorry, that was Kailele. Martha, over to you.
Yeah, yes, absolutely. First of all, I'm so thrilled to meet both Kaleli and Terrence today. So this is in and of itself has just been the most amazing part of my day. And of course, always to see AmickyCarol again is fabulous. I think I would build on both what Terrence and Kalile said in that I'll bring it back to active listening and say, are you asking the right questions? And then the follow-up to that I thought of, because I don't want to be redundant of what I said earlier, right, is are you asking the follow-up question to others and to yourself of why? Why is maybe my favorite question. And I think it builds a lot on what's already been said by others today. So I don't think this is rocket science. I just kind of like boiling it down to think through what the right questions are to ask. It's worth taking time to figure out what prompts make sense, whether it's for your organization, whether it's for your role in that organization, whether it's for your personal life. And then follow up with either yourself or the entity or the person sitting across from you and ask why. Because just to give an example, when you ask a question and maybe you say, this is silly, what's your favorite cookie? And their response is chocolate chip. That's great. You now have more information, but you want to know why. And guess what? More often than not, you're going to hear something in response to that, like, because my mother, and I'm going to bring it back, AmickyCarol, because you kindly brought her up. My mother's birthday is today. She would have been 96 because my mother made fantastic chocolate chip cookies. By the way, my own mother didn't necessarily. I'm just saying that as an example. In other words, the why becomes the most important part of that exchange.
Nice. I love it. Thank you. And Terrence?
I'm thinking of chocolate cookies now. Thank you.
Well,
Thank you,
well
Martha.
deserved. You all should have chocolate cookies afterwards, for sure.
Marta, please, Marta, please. When I come to US, Marta, please send me your location.
Hey, all right. So for me, and I want to address this to someone who's sort of grown up in environments where you've had less than enough. You've got firsthand experience of when things are not working. And that has become your reality. You are so attuned to to how things go wrong. And my pushback to you, and as it was my pushback to myself, was, what if we changed our expectation and actually empowered our expectation and began to look at life and say, what if what I'm doing actually worked? What could it look like? And begin to paint those pictures of what an outcome we desire is. And we go around life now. I think we do this a lot with my wife in couples counseling, and we always ask them, what do you want? Not what do you not want? So my closing thought would be, let's live life expecting to win.
I love that. I really do. Thank you so much, guys. Let's live life expecting to win. And you can't do that without hoping, right? So as we bring this conversation to a close, I'm just reminded that one theme kept returning to us, and that was hope. Not the kind of hope that simply wishes things will get better, or the kind of hope that moves people to act, to build, to encourage, to believe in possibilities others might not yet see. And as Terence said, the hope that expects to win. Today, we've heard that real change doesn't happen overnight. It takes listening, it takes courage, it takes community, and people who are willing to stand up for something bigger than themselves. And we've also heard something equally important, that hope placed in the right things can change the direction of a life, a community, and sometimes even a nation. Hope is built when people truly listen. Hope grows when someone believes in you. And hope becomes change when communities take action. So wherever you're listening from around the world, we want to leave you with one simple question. Where are you placing your hope, and what difference could it make? To my wonderful guests, Kailele, Martha, Terence, thank you so much for sharing your journeys and insights with me today. I've had a blast. To everyone listening, remember, hope is not passive. Hope is something we practice. It's something we give to others. And sometimes it begins with a simple decision to believe that change is possible. And so until next time, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep changing the world. This is the World Changers Podcast with AmickyCarol. Thank you.